Hey, this is Zachlog the Great. I am here tonight with my friend Nate,
Hello.
and also we are joined tonight by author Tom Simon, the author most recently, if I am correct, of Writer's Block, an Insider's Guide.
That's right.
Um, that is available on Amazon. I'm going to put a link to his Amazon page in the I'm going to put a link to his Amazon page in the description of this video, and also to his own website at bondwine.com. And as usual before these videos, just a quick reminder, if you like these videos, if you like my work, the poetry, or my own commentary, I do have a subscribe star page, and I just added a cheapo option. So for as little as $1, you can join in that and gain all of the glorious benefit. You get to be part of my what's the word? It starts with an E. Entourage. You get to be part of my entourage. There you go. And all of the glorious benefits that come with that. So that is subscribestar.com/Zachlog-the-great. And having said that, Mr. Simon agreed to read the poem for us tonight. So I'm going to try to put it up on the screen. I'm a little worried that screen sharing might not be working like I wanted it to, but I'm going to try to put it up on the screen. Let's see. And is that working? Screen sharing yet?
It did something.
Okay, there we go.
We have it. We have it.
Okay. So, Tom, if you would like to take it away.
All right. This is Upon the Image of Death by Robert Southwell, Saint Robert Southwell, in fact. Before my face the picture hangs that daily should put me in mind of those cold names and bitter pangs that shortly I am like to find. But yet, alas, full little I do think hereon that I must die. I often look upon a face most ugly, grisly, bare, and thin. I often view the hollow place where eyes and nose had sometimes been. I see the bones across that lie, yet little think that I must die. I read the label underneath that telleth me whereto I must. I see the sentence eke that saith, Remember, man, that thou art dust. But yet, alas, but seldom I do think indeed that I must die. Continually at my bed's head a hearse doth hang, which doth me tell that I ere morning may be dead, though now I feel myself full well. But yet, alas, for all this I have little mind that I must die. The gown which I do use to wear, the knife wherewith I cut my meat, and eke that old and ancient chair which is my only usual seat, all these do tell me I must die, and yet my life amend not I. My ancestors are turned to clay, and many of my mates are gone. My youngers daily drop away, and can I think to scape alone? No, no, I know that I must die, and yet my life amend not I. Not Solomon for all his wit, nor Samson, though he were so strong. No king nor person ever yet could scape, but death laid him along. Wherefore I know that I must die, and yet my life amend not I. Though all the East did quake to hear of Alexander's dreadful name, and all the West did likewise fear to hear of Julius Caesar's fame, yet both by death in dust now lie. Who then can scape, but he must die? If none can scape death's dreadful dart, if rich and poor his beck obey, if strong, if wise, if all do smart, then I to scape shall have no way. Oh, grant me grace, O God, that I may my life may mend, sith I must die.
Okay. So, um, Nate, since Mr. Simon was kind enough to read for us, would you like to be the first to comment?
Sure. My comment is that, like many other things that are tonic, this is a little bitter at first, but in the end, it'll do you good. You're talking about the whole thing is, there comes a day when I'm going to die, and you're going to die, and all of our friends and families will die. To put it rather, so to put it with rather a bit of panic is, we're all going to die.
Someday.
Because on a long enough time scale, everyone's survival drops to 0. But that's okay. It gives you time. Hopefully, anyway, you will have time to sort yourself out and to better yourself and to cultivate virtues. And, so you have time before you die to let that nasty thought be a spur for you to become better and greater. So that rather than live in fear, you can live in the joy of, knowing that your life is in your own hands. You can, largely anyway. And, you can be and do what you feel it is appropriate to be and do and live the best life you can. And then eventually give it up. But so like I said, it stings a little bit at first to be like, my God, I'm going to die. I'm all this pleasantness, the love of my children, my wife's smile, sunlight breaking through the clouds, a good fast car, a tasty gumbo. All of those things are going to be lost to me. But in the end, you realize that I can live a life of virtue. I can make myself subservient to eternal truth. And in that way, I am not lost to them forever. And whatever happens, after death, well, we'll approach that. So we'll approach that activity once we pass through the gate.
Yes, it's a little bit it's a somewhat accidentally appropriate choice for me. I already had this poem recorded and scheduled to go up this past Monday, when the Friday, just a couple days before that, I was in a pretty car accident that if you saw the vehicle, you would be probably pretty amazed that I am essentially unharmed. I was a little sore for a couple of days. Appear to be no lasting effects, and it's just,
praise God for that.
Yeah, and so it's just this little reminder. Hey, you could have died. Not only is this going to happen someday, it's going to happen eventually. No matter what you have going on, no matter what physical condition you're in, it could happen any day. And that's part of the reason, on a more personal level, Jesus told us to, be ready, like, someone watching for a thief coming in the night. Because if then you can stop it, but you don't know. So you just have to keep in readiness. And it's the same thing. In one form or another, death could come to any single one of us at any moment. An apparently perfectly healthy person, in his 30s, could have a brain aneurysm no one ever saw. It go, you're done. You know, that happens. And, you know, are you really, have you understood that? Have you accepted that? And have you figured out what that means for your life? I think is kind of the question. And I'm going to stop for a moment.
I've had my own brushes. While I was still in my 30s, my immune system decided to devour all of my platelets, so my blood would not clot. And
That's a problem.
Before I noticed that this was going on, you know, I could have cut myself, and it wouldn't have taken a very serious cut for me to simply bleed to death because there was nothing to stop it.
It wouldn't even take a cut. It would just take a minor, what would otherwise be a minor bruise.
That's, yeah, you wouldn't bleed to death very fast from a bruise because the blood doesn't have any place to go, and you'd notice that there was something very wrong. But if you've got an open cut, then it could be quite a short business. So, you know, that made me mindful of that sort of thing. And yet one, you know, sort of returns to one's habits after the crisis is past. You know, it doesn't have a lasting effect on your life unless you remain mindful of it.
Yep.
You know, and a few years later, I had a mild stroke, and you know, I went through the same thing. But it was the second brush, so I took that more seriously. In fact, it was right after that I started publishing books instead of just pottering around writing for my own amusement. Whether that was a wise decision is still yet to be determined. But at any rate, I thought, you know, I've only got so much time to put some of this stuff out there and to make a mark. There's an old rabbinical saying that a man should do 3 things before he dies: raise a child, plant a tree, and write a book. Well, I've got the books well covered. I planted a tree once, but it got cut down.
You planted it. You did that part.
I did that
what
part.
What happens afterwards is not, you know, is not your fault necessarily. Well, unless you cut it down.
No, I did.
Contradictory. Okay.
I didn't, but it was inconvenient to someone else after a number of years.
Well, your books might be inconvenient to some people as well.
Oh, I hope so.
Hopefully inconvenient to the right people, or the wrong people. I don't know quite where.
Which actually brings me to the subject of Robert Southwell himself. I was reading up on Robert Southwell, or Saint Robert Southwell, as he has been now since he was canonized in 1970. He was, for those in our audience who may not be familiar with him, he was an English Jesuit priest and missionary, and he spent a number of years traveling around in the England of Queen Elizabeth I, giving the Catholic sacraments to people who requested them. He wasn't political. He wasn't trying to do anything, you know, that we would recognize as wrong, but it happened to be illegal to be a Catholic priest in England. Just setting foot on English soil was subject to a death penalty if you were a Catholic priest, or harboring one in your house, which is why so many of the old country houses from that period have what they call priest holes, where they could hide the priests away when the police came looking. And they
call something else in Germany.
Most of his other poems while he was shut up in the Tower of London, awaiting a sentence of death. And he was, in fact, hanged, drawn, and quartered for the offense of being a priest, a Catholic priest in England. So this, I think, I share this because it adds weight, I think, to the poem. I mean, he knew that he was going to die, and he knew it was only a matter of time. And that old and ancient chair, which was his only usual seat, was probably the chair in his prison cell.
Man.
And if anyone had was an expert on knowing that we're all going to die. Robert Southwell was well qualified, and he was only in his mid-30s when he died.
Yeah,
that really does add another level of intensity to it. I mean, that's a virtuous death too. So, it's one of those times where I look as a guy, I'm just like, I feel like I'm nothing special, I'm not a terribly wise man, I don't hold up my own standards of virtue half the time. But to hear about a man like that who gave his life for his faith, and then he's talking about, and yet my life amend not I. I'm like, well, I mean, how much mending do you really got to do, man? You're getting ready to be martyred. That's pretty intense.
Well, there's also the other thing that, kind of I don't know if it's quite a paradox, but it may be at least somewhat of a contradiction, that probably in many ways, the closer, the more Christ-like we become, the easier it is for us to see the shortfallings. The easier it is for us to see what is, where we're still failing. And so, like, for someone who is, completely surrendered to sin, for someone who has, completely given in, or almost completely given into, some kind of depravity, they don't even know. Like, it's not even something, there's not even an alarm bell going off, this is a problem. For someone with an ordinary conscience, most of us know, we have some kind of sense, I'm kind of not what I should be, but this is what I am. And for someone who's, still, more or less ordinary person, but is genuinely pursuing God, that sense sharpens. And you see not just this vague sense, I'm not what I should be, but this and this and this needs to change. So, from our perspective, there might not have been that much for him to fix, but for him, it might have been glaringly obvious, wow, I'm still so far.
Yes. C.S. Lewis said in Mere Christianity somewhere, this is a paraphrase from memory, he said that the better a man is, the better he understands the evil that's still in him.
Yep. And that's very true. It's Dunning-Kruger, right?
Yes.
It's a moral Dunning-Kruger effect. When you're a heathen, you think, I'm fine. Because you know nothing of virtue, you heathen. Oh man, but I enjoyed the poem as a poem. It has a good sort of, I feel like it has like a weighty verse to it. Like, it's not like just a little pew 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 pew, just nice little couplets just going, cascading down. It actually has a bit of moving parts in there, but I feel like it works like a well-weighted set of gears. Yes. In my mind. Like, it has like this sort of good mechanical, but like nice heavy thing, not like it feels like it would actuate with like clunks, just ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk.
Yeah, it's a little bit like a grand.
And it brings you down to this is what we're talking about. And so thematically it's extremely appropriate because it's a heavy subject and it's also inevitable, like that whole mechanical thing. And so this, like I said, that I really enjoyed the reading of it. I mean, I like a good solid, a good solid clank when you do something. Which is why cell phones bug me, because you just hit them and they're like haptic feedback. I'm like, Haptic feedback is for weaklings. Give me something that actually like clack. Yes.
So you're saying you want one of the old Nokia ones?
Yeah. And you got to put the case around it to protect the floor in case you drop it.
That actually reminds me of something. I think I had meant. I don't think I did say this. I think I had intended to say this when we were talking about one of the C.S. Lewis poems. But one thing that's fascinating to me with C.S. Lewis, even some of his poems feel like a syllogism, with that kind of for major premise, minor premise, and crud. What's the third part called? Conclusion?
Yeah.
Okay. So major premise, minor premise, conclusion, and therefore, and this one has that same kind of, very, it works very well as a poem. There's no disputing that this is in a well done poetry, but it also has that very clear, like you said, logical progression, thump 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 from one thing to the next.
Yes, and I think that's partly a sign of the kind of education that Southwell had, that his mind worked logically like that, and that he lived in an age when it was still considered appropriate to bring that into poetry. It wasn't just, vomit out your feelings on the page the way it has been for so many modern poets.
That's, like I've said a couple times before, that's part of the reason I've been doing my I started the poetry series and later the poetry discussions, because, the way poetry is being taught today is just disastrous. And no, there's so much more that this can be than just this semi-coherent, ramblings about feelings and no clear meaning.
Andrew Clavin talked about this the other day on his show. And he's talking about writing prose versus writing poetry, and it's, you see a lot of people they like to write poetry, but they hate to read it. They hate to read it because it's just the barf. Like you said, it's this emotive thing where you're just letting it all out, or at least that's how it's taught. And so it's fun to write poetry. My God, I gave into that temptation when I was an angsty youngster, and I look back on some of it, and I'm like, oh, okay, that was terrible. But writing prose is ordered, and you got to kind of structure it and kind of think out how you want to put it. I mean, if you want to write, comprehensible prose, there are rules. But poetry is a lot more free form, or allows you to be a lot more free form. And so,
but then when you're working in a specific rhyme and meter scheme that's already generally accepted, then that imposes a discipline and makes makes poetry a heightened version of what you're doing with prose, which is the way that
if you submit yourself to a structure of poetry, but if you're just trying to be like a quote slam poet or something, no. And so, like I said, that's one of the things that you got to have to do good poetry, is that sort of ordered thought. And with the sort of downfall of that is been the downfall of a lot of good writing. I feel like we don't have the same quality.
Lest we forget. Yeah, well, and the other thing, the other thing is that people, again, people who teach English badly, or at least people who teach poetry badly to high schoolers, say, "Oh, you can express your feelings," and it's like, well, okay, that's true, but the real objective is not to express them, but to get other people to feel the same thing, and that is not the same thing at all.
Yes.
Getting other people to feel what you feel is not at all the same as trying to say what you feel. And it's a
How about
rather.
Before you say what you feel? How about before you say what you feel, you think about it for 5 minutes? Give us, put some reflection on it for a minute, and then let's have this conversation. Be it prose, poetry, a painting, whatever. But don't just give it to us raw. Process that a little bit, right?
Well, that's also I am fairly confident that Mr. Simon has read this. I don't know about you, Nate. Have you read The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis? Gonna put that down as no.
I am not sure. I went on sort of a binge of going through a bunch of C.S. Lewis's essays and stuff a while back, and hitting me right now with it, I don't remember if I got around to that one.
Okay, but one of the things.
Man, is that where he talks about one of the perfect omnipotent teachers?
Kind of, yeah. That might be what you're thinking. No, that might be what you're thinking of. And he talks about the modern education is producing what he calls men without chests, and it's people. I've
had that one.
It creates people with an intellect. Well, we're not really getting that so much. Anyway, it creates people with an intellect and people with he calls that the head, and people with appetites, the belly. But there's nothing mediating between the intellect and the appetites. There's no framework of ethical. There's no moral framework to the world that connects those two together. And so you have this person with a mind and a body, but no soul, kind of. And then what does that do? What does that create? That can create some pretty terrible things very quickly.
Well, yeah, because you bend all the power of the mind into the service of the appetite. Basically, you spend all of your time figuring out how can I gratify myself, rather than anything else. Rather than how can I create? How can I improve? It's just how can I get? And so you need that sort of middle ground where more than just thinking, more than just desiring. You have something there to temper it, because your brain, your mind, will bend itself to whatever sort of whatever end it is given. And so, like I said, you can have it be governed by a heart, be governed by the chest, and where you keep, courage and nobility, charity and virtue, or we can have it, where you can keep basically the interest of others, or you can have it governed by the gut, which, to be frank, is.
So, Mr. Simon, haven't heard from you in a minute.
Yes, I was having a little bit of trouble with the audio on my end.
Oh, okay. You back then?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Things were dropping out, and I wasn't quite able to follow the whole conversation.
Oh, well, we were just saying about like I said, modern, abolition of man.
I caught the gist, but there were particular words that were dropping out, and I could not comment intelligently.
Ah, okay.
Well, that hasn't stopped most people these days anyhow, but good on you.
Welcome to the internet.
Would you like to join the YouTube comments section?
Oh.
I have once or twice.
One thing that I found very interesting about Robert Southwell, who was very, as we've been discussing, I think C.S. Lewis, well, Lewis, of course, would have been intimately familiar with his works because he wrote his the volume on 16th century prose and poetry, excluding the drama, for the Oxford History of English Literature, and he read every single available manuscript in English by a 16th century author. So he knew this poem. We may be certain of that. And I think he would have said that that Southwell was a poet with a chest par excellence. And one of the things that I picked up that was very interesting is that Southwell is supposed to have, none of his work was published during his lifetime. You know, he wrote it in notebooks while he was in prison, and it was sort of smuggled out after he died and eventually put into print. But he had a lot of influence on other poets, and one of them was John Donne, who, you know, everybody knows John Donne, even if they don't. He was the one who wrote "No Man is an Island." You know, never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And you can actually, just thinking of that poem and looking at this one, you can see the traces of influence there, both applying great technical skill to grappling with these, you know, with the last things and with the great issues and what do you make of your life. And this stuff is coming straight from what Lewis called the chest. Mm-hmm. And I think and as you say, Nate, it's very tonic, you know, but it's a tonic that I think it would be good for most of us to partake a little of from time to time.
Well, and and the other thing with sorry, there's a train nearby here, and this is not a well-insulated room. But the other thing, this isn't something you want to think about necessarily every day. Like you don't need to have like, you know, printed above your door, you know, before you leave the house, you might die today. That's probably going a little far. At the same time, this is something that you should take just at least a little time to think about, you know, once in a while. It should be, you know, kind of in, you know, the back of your mind. Like, you know, I have a limited amount of time here. You know, what am I doing with it? Is this really what I should be doing with it? And now I'm worrying about how much time I've spent playing video games. Which the which actually reminds me of a joke, sort of a joke I thought of a while ago. It's always struck me as kind of odd how, like, old people do everything. Like, little kids are always in a hurry, and old people always do everything really slowly. Like, you'd think it'd be the other way around, because the old people don't have much time left. Shouldn't they be the ones in a hurry?
Well, capabilities, friend, capabilities. Sometimes you just have to go slow. It is the tortoise's nature to have a pace.
I know. I don't know.
I think.
I'll give you another reason. When you're old, you finally realize that you can't do everything you wanted to. So you pick one thing and try to do it right.
That's very good.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing to keep in mind too.
That's why I'm going to be so good at Fortnite. No, I like the whole idea, this idea of, thinking about death, considering it, understanding that it is coming. To those who think that, considering this and making it sort of a feature of your thought life. Not the only thing you dwell on. We're not trying to, sit here and brood darkly about our impending mortality. But, it's good to think about. And, it points you toward the wisdom of Ecclesiastes,
Yes.
We're all going to die. The world is flawed. Good and bad is going to happen to me just like everybody else. No matter how virtuous I may be or, how much of a cad, I will reap things that I do not deserve. And there are times that I will be cheated of the things I do deserve. And so how do you square it? How do you deal with the fact that in the end, the fate of every man is dust and death? It's funny, it wraps back around to this sort of, prosaic thing where it says that, enjoy, the beauty of it is this, that every man should enjoy his work under the sun, the love of the wife of his youth, the affections and the comradeship of his friends and all those sort of things, just the simple good things, and basically Ecclesiastes ends with a country song.
Yeah, well, there's that actually also reminds me of the song by the band The Newsboys. I believe it was written by Steve Taylor. I don't know if either of you are familiar with him. But the part of the song goes, when we get what we don't deserve, it's a real good thing. When we don't get what we deserve, it's a real good thing.
It's a real good thing.
And there's this wonderful thing called grace where we don't get what we deserve. And
to quote the luminary musician Reliant K says the beauty of grace is that it makes life not fair.
Yeah, and so
if I got what I deserved, I don't think I would be here now.
No, and that's we're going to just flog Lewis tonight. But in the Great Divorce, he's talking about these people who have come up through the cracks in the soil of heaven, out of hell, and they're meeting with people who have gone before them into heaven, who have returned here to sort of the landing area, and they're talking to them about trying to convince them to come with them in deeper into heaven. And there's this one very proud workman, and he says, "All I want's my rights." It's like, just give me my due. That's all I ask for. I ask for no charity. And he's like, "No, you don't understand, bud. Charity is what you must have, because if you're given your rights, you deserve nothing but the worst." And so it was a great moment, because you're like, so many people are living that way. Like, no, I just want what I deserve. Give me my dues. And it's like, no, please don't stand on your dues. Because on the day that death does come for you, and the future alluded to by this poem arrives, well, you're not going to like it much, because you're going to get what you deserve.
And also, like the poem says repeatedly, we have a chance, starting this moment right now, to amend, to change our ways, and that's kind of the whole point. You have the choice. You have this moment right here. What are you going to do with it? And can you with God's grace make right your life and set right your let God set right your failings.
I have read not long ago a biography of Lewis that in the epilogue mentioned something that he said when he was the tutor to the playwright and critic Kenneth Tynan, who was very far from being a religious man of any kind. I mean, he was he invented the art of dropping the F-bomb on the stage. That was his line of work.
Lovely.
And he was a student at Oxford when and he had Lewis for a tutor there, and he was feeling very depressed and sorry for himself at that time in his life. But he had happened to mention to Lewis previously that he had been, as a child, he had been in the London Blitz, and he'd come very close to having a bomb drop down his chimney, and actually went down one of the neighbors' chimneys and blew up their house. And he just narrowly survived. He could have been killed by flying fragments or broken glass or any number of things, but he just barely made it out of that. And although Lewis knew that he couldn't frame anything in explicitly religious terms, when he heard that from Tynan that he was, thinking about killing himself, he said, every day that you've had since that bomb missed you has been a free gift that only the most wanton ingratitude could refuse. And which was a wonderful way of putting the same thing in terms that Tynan didn't have to be a Christian to understand and accept. And I think that's something that poems like these do as well. I mean, yes, Southwell brings God in at the very end, as I believe he should, but you don't need to have that point of view on things to benefit from what he has to say. And I think that's a very powerful gift as well. You can't give somebody grace if they don't want it, but you can give them some of the fruits of grace.
Well said.
Well, I don't know. I feel like I've covered most of the things I wanted to say about this poem. I don't know. I mean, it's also the kind of thing where I feel like if I went back, we could go through, pretty much line by line, but that's probably a little more time than we want to spend tonight. It is. I will say
the mark of quality is that, upon further review, there's more to say.
Yeah, and it is interesting, like, the part, my ancestors are turned to clay, and many of my mates are gone, and I'm not that old, although I am older than most people watching this probably think. But it's a little, it was a little weird to me about a year ago when my grandmother died, because I realized at that moment I currently have one living ancestor. That's all. And I was like, that's a strange feeling when you think about it. There's only one person before me now. And yeah, and so, like I said, it's
after my parents died a few years ago, the thought did cross my mind, oh crap, I'm next.
that's pretty much it. Yeah, and like I said, you don't need to you don't need to wear all black clothing and have black eyeshadow and be moping about death all the time.
Or the equivalent back in Southwell's day where you kept a skull on your desk.
Or you could be Byron and turn that skull upside down and fix a wine stem to it and turn it into a cup. We covered that poem as well.
Turn that frown upside down and drink wine out of it.
But like I said, you don't have to be constantly moping about death. But there is a certain healthy level of respect for that, of keeping this in mind, and it's kind of one of the great themes of literature, and one that not always, I don't know, I don't see a lot of modern literature, drama really seem to follow through on this, mostly because if when people start thinking about this, when people start appreciating this, a lot of people tend to think a little more religiously, and to the people who are in control of the gatekeepers, that's a good word, of our literature, our movies. They don't particularly like that train of thought. They would rather derail that. They would rather you focus on this moment and getting the, well, like I said, they want you to have the head and they want you to have the belly and not so much else. They don't want you to think about those things that might develop a bit of a chest. And
it's Brave New World, isn't it? I mean, he's starting to have serious thoughts. Give him a gram of Soma.
I think you've had a bit too much to think today.
Yes.
And so...
Oh, God. Well, and the sad thing is that they're cheating themselves, to consider, the foregone conclusion and what happens after that. It adds richness to life. That's the butter in life right there. That's what really draws out, the goodness in things, is knowing that, well, it's not forever. Every experience I have is a moment in time that is gone forever, and, my experience on this earth will end. And so I need to appreciate at a deeper level, the beauty of things. I need to appreciate the goodness of things. I need to, taste the sharpness of the pain of things. Because one day, beauty and sharpness and, richness are going to fade away, and I'm going to be dead. And now, as a Christian, I believe that I'll go on to greater beauty and richness. But, on earth, there are still so many good things. The Lord created a good world, and we're only here for so short a time. And so it keeps me mindful. My own brushes with the my own small dodges of the sides there, they've helped me to appreciate good times. I appreciate the feel. I appreciate the feeling. When I get my pistol into battery and it's that nice clack. I appreciate the fact that I've got a fast car. I appreciate the hugs of my children, the kisses of my wife. And the just good heartiness of a steak. Understanding that, one of these days, one of these things is going to get me. It enriches my life. It doesn't, it doesn't tremble me. It doesn't, leave me so worried that, I can't, I have to shrink back and I can't embrace things because you never know which one of them's going to be the one.
Where's my safe space?
I want to live. Yeah, where's my safe space? It's called a grave. You'll be there eventually. But, all of these things, they've helped me to live better and to think harder and to appreciate more deeply. And I think in the end, that is where, this knowledge of death and this understanding of mortality is supposed to take us. And if you have some sort of a chest to go with, then it can bring you there. But the mind doesn't want to consider the end of the mind, and the appetites are ever unsatisfied, and so the thought of the end of indulgence is terrifying. And so without a chest, you end up just shrinking and being diminished by this. And it's, like I said, it's a terrible loss to those who don't embrace the idea that, yes, death is coming. Let us enjoy what precedes.
Amen to that.
Well, like I said a while ago, I think I covered most of what I wanted to say about this poem. Tom, did you have any final thoughts for on this one?
No, I think Nate summed things up admirably.
Okay, Nate, anything else, or have you got yours?
Good night and God bless.
Okay,
That'll do.
well, thank you for joining us. God be with you, and remember, amend your life, since you must die.
Thank you, and blessed All Hallows Eve to you all.
And
Good
also
night.
Reformation Day.
I did
As
not know
Luther
that.
said, yeah, Reformation Day. So instead of trick-or-treating, we nailed 95 Reese's to the door, and, and with that, I'm out.
Okay, good night.